Hi there, I'm Mia Halme-Tuomisaari, Associate Professor in Human Rights Studies at Lund University. In this video, I will be giving tips for how to vacuum pack your thesis. Let me start my screen once again, and we'll get started. These tips for vacuum packing are most suited for the very end of your thesis writing process, roughly for the time when you have between 10 days to a week before deadline. I'm keeping things very simple and concrete because I know that at this stage, things may feel a bit overwhelming and you may feel quite stressed. So this is done in as simple a way as possible here with the instructions. So the very first thing I suggest is that you print everything. As I have said, I don't generally encourage too much printing, but at this final phase, it is useful to get a concrete, tangible hold of everything that you have written. That includes, of course, the table of contents because you will need it later. Then what you will do, step number 2, is you will select themes. And ideally, they should be your keywords. If they are not yet your keywords, after vacuum packing, you can change that. You will need these themes for going over the entity. Write them on a sheet of paper. After that, take out highlighting markers. You will need around 4 to 5 to 6, and give each keyword a color and a code. It may be that you find yourself having more themes than you actually would have in your keywords, or maybe you have lots of keywords, but don't be stingy at this stage. It's better that you have more keywords than not enough of them. You really want to get a good overview of what kinds of things you are discussing. And what keywords concretely mean here is that if you are doing a study, let's say of the issue of abortion, for example, abortion would be one keyword. If you are looking at that issue in a particular country, that country would be another keyword. If you are talking about human rights and their relationship to abortion, which you likely would be, then human rights would be another keyword, and so forth and so forth and so forth. So be very diligent, and you can add a few keywords also once you start going over your text. After that, take out paper number 2 and write at the top number of each chapter and write under it page number so that you will end up with something like this if you're able to see it. Nothing very fancy, so just a sheet of paper, and evidently you can also use a simple Excel and print that out. The most important thing is that you have some kind of a concrete paper where you have enough space for all your chapters and then all the page numbers that you have in each chapter. Then we start coding. So color code your thesis. Every single sheet of paper, you go over it and you highlight each instance when you encounter a theme. So every single time, if you are working on a thesis on abortion, every single time you are talking about abortion, you would highlight it. Every single time you would be talking of your chosen country, you will highlight that. Every single time that you encounter your a particular keyword, you will highlight it, or you may have a combination so that you have a yellow, but then you highlight it and then you need to circle it. So just make sure that you have enough codes. First, and these are very pragmatic steps, but I have my reasons for doing it like this. First, highlight them in the text itself. And after you are done with that, go over the entity and mark everything at the top page, maybe the top right corner, so that you have a nice concrete grasp of what is where. After that, what you do is that you bring these color codes to the paper number 2. So you will concretely, it will mean that you will mark yellow, red, red and yellow, red and yellow, no color, no color, no color. So we'll combine the color coding of your entire thesis draft with this one single sheet of paper. And what this will mean that you will see in 1 second what colors appear where and what codes. So you will see exactly what is going on in your thesis. Why is this useful? What will happen by this stage is that you will have written bits and pieces of different themes here and there. And because the number of words and pages that you're working with is quite large at this stage, you will not be able to keep all of it straight in your head. So you will have this feeling very likely that I've written about that somewhere, but I'm not quite sure what I said there. And I'm continuing on with this theme here. Did I already cover that part in chapter 2, for example, or chapter 1? So when you combine all of it with this one single sheet of paper, you can instantly see what is happening in your thesis. Now, Combine the color coding to your table of contents, which means that you will be able to see instantly which parts are discussed under which sections. That's also relevant because you want to make sure that different sections will sort of flow together logically. And that to ensure that, what you do next is you read coded sections together. So if you have yellow in, let's say in the introduction here, and then you have it again here, and then you have it again there, read them consecutively. So read only the sections that have the same highlighter, the same code. This way you can make sure that there are no overlaps, there are no gaps, and there are no inconsistencies. So it may happen that you have thought, okay, I still need to write that, and then you realize you wrote it nowhere. What you can then do is you can add internal references. So you can say, see discussion on page so-and-so, or as was discussed in 4.3.1. And what this does is communicate in a very effective way to the reader that you are on top of your project. You know exactly what's going on where, and this is something that's quite impressive to a reader. For any sections without a code, get ruthless. And I mean this. It may feel like you're cutting your own fingers off, but it doesn't matter. At this point, even if you have been working on something for 3 days or 2 weeks, if it does not fall under one of your codes, it needs to go. You are only serving your thesis now. So there should be nothing in the nice to know category. And this actually applies to many sections that only have one code. So for example, let's say that we are talking about abortion in Ireland. Ireland would be then one code, but there should not be sections that are very long where there's just general discussion of Ireland. No, we would want discussions that talk about the role of abortion in Ireland, which would mean that ideally in most parts of your thesis, you should have not only one, but often 2 themes simultaneously. This is a way to ensure that your thesis really is sort of staying on the main topics of your discussion. Of course, sometimes you will have sections that only have one code, and that can be very well justified. However, for any sections that do not have any codes, you really, really need to think, what business does this section have in my thesis? You need to think, can I find a theme that is relevant that I need to pick out and give it a code? You really should not have any pages that have no code in them, that have none of the themes that you are talking in your thesis. There should be nothing in the nice to know category. So everything needs to have a motivation. After this, write 1 paragraph introductions to each subsection. So this will mean that 2.1.3, 5.1.2, you will write a 1 paragraph introduction of what will happen in that subsection. It may be that it gets a bit repetitive and you still want to edit and take some of them out, but for the purposes of this vacuum packing, just do that now. This means that you will go over each subsection with very clear thought. Okay, so what will I be doing in this section? And you can concretely keep it simple for yourself again. Pick out the most relevant sentences of what goes on, combine them together, and then you have that 1 paragraph introduction into each subsection. After that, join these introductions together by copy pasting them and edit. So you concretely go to chapter 3 and then 3.1 and 3.1.1, and you copy paste these sections together. And I said you can do it so that you first write introductions into 3.1.1, 3.1.2. After that, you combine these into an introduction into 3.1. And after you have written introductions to 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, then you copy paste these sections together and you arrive with an introduction for chapter 3. So you will want to edit, of course, that introduction because you do not want to have exact repetition in text. That is very frustrating to the reader, and you will be surprised how effectively exact same sentences pop out to the reader. It's really difficult to explain, but they really stand out. So you do not want to have the same exact sentences repeated. However, by doing it this way, well, I'll tell you just in a moment what is the advantage. Repeat this for each chapter. So go over the text after you have made sure that everything is logically connected in between different sections and there are no sort of nice to know basis stuff in the thesis. go over each section and do these introductions. After that, copy all chapter introductions together and edit, and that will give you an introduction to your thesis. So in the previous video that I did, I suggested that you write a 2-3 page summary of what the thesis is about. You can still leave that there, but you also will want to have a description where you introduce the content of all chapters. So you will now have a concrete introduction into the content of each individual chapter, which will very nicely correspond exactly with what is in your thesis. So now your thesis, after you have written these introductions, it will be vacuum packed. It means that your thesis does exactly what you say that it will do and nothing more. So when you read the first introductory chapter and you go to a section where there's a chapter plan, what is stated under each chapter description will correspond exactly with what is included in the chapters, the reason being that you have written these chapter descriptions after you have written the chapters themselves. Now, everything is in the thesis is logically connected to your main themes, and there are no loose ends. So there is nothing in chapter 5 that miraculously appears and is not related to any theme and which just bedazzles the reader of so what is going on here. Everything will be logically connected. And in Finnish and Swedish, we have the saying about the red thread. So this is what it means. Everything is connected to the red thread, which means the overarching plot, the main message of your thesis, and it is logically connected and internally coherent. Now, I'm in this slide already congratulating you, but let me just really quickly recap how long something like this will take. You may think that it could take you maybe a half a day. It should not take you any longer than that. So if you think, reminding of all the steps, you print everything out. After that, you think of your code. Then you create your table. Then you read the entity through and you highlight it, you color code it. Then you combine the color coding to this one sheet of paper and also your table of content. If you do all of that, I think that should take you maybe 2-3 hours max. Then after that, you will want to reserve additional time, maybe another half a day, but that's actually very generous time for writing all of those introductions. And I would say max 1 day. That's, again, generous time. You can do with a lot less, but maximum 1 day and your thesis would be fully vacuum packed. And now I say congratulations, you are almost ready to submit.